أهلا ومرحبا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. أنا مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. لم يحقق دونالد ترامب وحده انتصارا كبيرا في انتخاباتنا الرئاسية فقط، بل حقق الحزب الجمهوري أيضا فوزا كبيرا في انتخابات الكونغرس، حيث حصل على الأغلبية في كل من مجلسي الشيوخ والنواب. وللمرة الأولى منذ سنوات عديدة سوف يسيطر حزب واحد على السلطتين التنفيذية والتشريعية للحكومة. كما نعلم أن المحكمة الأولى تتعاطف مع ترامب بعد أن عين 3 قضاة خلال فترة ولايته الأولى في المكتب البيضاوي. ما هي تداعيات حكومة الحزب الواحد؟ هل سيتبع الجمهوريون في مجلسي النواب والشيوخ أوامر البيت الأبيض؟ وهل سيستطيع الجمهوريون الموافقة على أي قانون يريدونه؟ وما هي القوة الوحدة التي سيتمتع بها الديمقراطيون؟ لمناقشة نتائج انتخابات الكونغرس يسعدني أن أرحب باللجنة من المراقبين السياسيين البارزين ديفيد هوكينز وجيسيكا تايلور ودانيال ليتمان. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. Donald J. Trump won big on Election Day. Republicans, more generally, won big too, taking both the House of Representatives and the Senate. We will have one-party government for the first time in years. What will that look like? How did it happen? I'm delighted to have Jessica Taylor and Daniel Littman, along with David Hawkins here today to help explain all this. Jessica, in the Senate, the Republicans won a slim majority. What happened there?
Well, Republicans were always favored to win the Senate simply because the map ran through incredibly red states like West Virginia, Montana, and Ohio. And so, as expected, Republicans were able to flip those seats. The surprise came in Pennsylvania, which gave them a 4-seat pickup. But ultimately, so we're looking at a 53-47 majority for Republicans. But it ultimately could have been much worse, actually, where it could have reached as high as 56 or 57, because there were 4 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Arizona, which Donald Trump carried, but which elected Democratic senators. And that's a rarity because we've only seen in the Trump era of 2016 and in 2020, states split their votes between the Senate and the presidency only once. So this actually could have been much worse for Democrats. So I think that they're just happy that it is a 53-47 majority. So Republicans actually left a lot of possible seats on the table.
So Daniel, let's take a closer look at some of this. Who are these new Republican faces that will have a voice in the United States Senate? Are any of them likely to be national figures on key issues?
Well, you have Dave McCormick, who won in Pennsylvania, even though Senator Bob Casey is still contesting it, trying to get, there's a recount happening. McCormick is a former Bush administration official, former CEO of Bridgewater Associates, which is one of the world's largest hedge funds, and served in the military. And so he's likely to be a key voice on military affairs. And, you know, you could see him having national aspirations one day. You also have people like Bernie Moreno in Ohio, a former auto dealer, Tim Sheehy in Montana, who started a company to fight wildfires, which as climate change happens, it's becoming more lucrative for him. And so Republicans were using these very wealthy figures who did not have to fundraise as much to defeat Democrats in the last election. And so they were trying to stay away from fringe figures like you had in 2022 when you had Herschel Walker and Dr. Oz, who were not very electable. And so they were kind of sticking to businessmen, which is the usual Republican persona for these types of seats.
So one of those fringe figures, I suppose one could say, David, is Carrie Lake in Arizona. She lost as Jessica said, there were a handful of Democrats that won in states that Joe Biden lost, that Donald Trump won fairly handily. What was the formula for success for Democrats in these?
Well, one part of the formula was to not tie themselves too closely to the top of the ticket, and to talk about issues that were different than what the top of the ticket was talking about. In some cases, state-specific issues. In some cases, more of a singular focus on economic issues. You're right. There were some kind of a surprise to me that there's 10% of the electorate in Arizona voted for split their ticket and voted for Donald Trump and Ruben Gallegos, who are, they're two pretty different politicians with two relatively different ideologies. But Gallego won by keeping it focused on, as they say in politics, keeping it focused on his own race, keeping it focused on himself, on the contrast with Kari Lake, who was an exception that kind of proved the rule that this time out, sort of big-time MAGA supporters were not who the Republicans preferred. She was a holdover. She'd run statewide 2 years ago as a sort of a MAGA candidate and didn't do too well. So I'd say the formula was keep it local, keep it on yourself, don't talk about the top.
So let's talk about the implications of Republican control of the Senate. Jessica, what will it mean for Donald Trump to have 53 Republicans in the Senate?
It means that they can lose up to 4 votes and still pass legislation. And that also sort of takes it out. We're looking at 2 key moderates that are in the Senate, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Susan Collins of Maine, who's up for re-election in 2026 and is probably the most vulnerable Republican senator. And so they can lose those 4 seats. If it would bring them to, you would have J.D. Vance. They can lose 3 rather, and then you would need J.D. Vance to break a tie. So especially as we're looking at some of Donald Trump's early cabinet appointments with some very controversial people, this gives them a little bit more of padding. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for Department of Health and Human Services, Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence, that they could really face some blowback. So again, they probably would have liked to have some of those other seats there, but it's not just that, okay, if Murkowski and Collins break, they do still have at least a slightly more of a cushion. And, as they're trying to push through tariffs, immigration, again, they have more of a cushion in that regard, but it's still not a huge one. So as we're looking at some of these other people and people who are possible retirements or are also up in 2026, like Tom Tillis of North Carolina. Remember that Mitch McConnell now is back in Republican. He's sort of a rank and file Republican now, and there's a very good chance he's not going to run for re-election in 2026. So he's sort of more unencumbered. I can also look to other senators that have broken with the party, like Bill Cassidy in Louisiana, who voted for impeachment, Todd Young in Indiana, who's also sort of gone against Trump in different regards. So I'm not sure it's going to be a blank check on some of these people. Someone like Marco Rubio there, the senator from Florida, I think is going to sail through confirmation, but others could face some pushback.
Let's talk about the new Republican leader of the Senate, Daniel. The Republicans got together, had their own election to replace Mitch McConnell, who will stay in the Senate, but who has brought to an end his record-breaking tenure as the leader of the Republicans. Who is John Thune, and why was he chosen by his fellow Republicans to be their leader?
So John Thune is a longtime politician from South Dakota. He represented it in the Senate, represents it, and also previously as a congressman. He was seen as more of a moderate choice compared to Rick Scott from Florida, who also ran and who was supported by some MAGA figures who thought that John Thune would be too harsh on Donald Trump and too willing to push back. And so Thune has had to, forge this working relationship with Trump, but it's going to be a tough role for him because he doesn't want to lose control of the Congress and the Senate being an independent but separate branch of government, whereas some Republican senators and Donald Trump himself will want it just to be a blank check, a rubber stamp for whatever Trump sends along to Capitol Hill. And so he faced John Cornyn, who's a longtime Texas senator, but Thune is younger, is seen as kind of the future of the party. But he is definitely an institutionalist. And what he can do for Trump, which would be more of his legacy, is because they have the majority, is confirmed hundreds of conservative judges over the next 2 to 4 years. And that would leave Trump's legacy for the next few decades because the courts are so important as well.
So let me ask you, David, what is an arcane issue for Americans and surely won't translate well into Arabic for our Middle Eastern viewers, but it's an important question. Donald Trump has said that he would like to make what are called recess appointments. Now, Daniel just said that John Thune is a traditionalist. What does all this mean? Are we likely to get odd appointments passed through without the constitutional prerogative of advise and consent, which is the Senate's role in approving or disapproving?
Right. So to roll it back from the very start, the way it is supposed to work is that the president nominates someone for a cabinet position or another high-level position, and that is subject to what is now a simple majority vote in the Senate. That sounds pretty simple. The framers of the Constitution in the 18th century, when there were not trains, planes, or automobiles, but horses and carriages, Congress wasn't around for much of the year. So the Constitution had a clause in it that said when Congress is gone, the president can fill an appointment temporarily without a Senate confirmation, can fill it until the end of essentially until the next election, for as long as 2 years. This is a leftover, a vestigial part of the Constitution that now Donald Trump wants to use to unilaterally fill his cabinet and other high-ranking officials with whomever he chooses, without the Senate even so much as taking a vote, except a vote to go home and let Donald Trump do this. This is, for somebody like me who's kind of thought about Congress and sort of nerdy constitutional balance of power things for my whole life, this is a new one on me. That a president would have the presumption that he could simply tell the Senate, we don't want you to, the 100 senators who've each spent, as Jessica knows way better than me, each of these senators have spent millions of dollars of other people's money to get these jobs. And now they're supposed to come to Washington and essentially not do what is one of their basic jobs, which is to review and assess and hold hearings on and look into the backgrounds of the people who are going to run the executive branch. An astonishing move, but it is something that Donald Trump could get away with. As Jessica made the excellent point, if the Republicans hold together, Donald Trump will get what he wants. If as many as 4 Republicans break from this, Donald Trump will not get what he wants. I'm going to have to hope and pray that 4 Republicans do not give Donald Trump what he wants, not because I'm for or against Donald Trump, but I'm for Congress having some power at the end of the 21st century.
All right, we're going to come back and continue this discussion of the congressional implications of our 2024 election in just a moment. Okay. My guests today include David Hawkins. David is senior editor of the American Leader. He was also the founding editor of thefulcrum.com, and he spent 2 decades as a senior editor at CQ and Roll Call, 2 must-read news sites covering Capitol Hill. Also with me is Daniel Lippman. Daniel covers Washington politics for Politico, and he authors the social data section of Politico's New York Playbook. He previously reported for the Wall Street Journal in New York. And with us today is Jessica Taylor. Jessica is the Senate and Governor's editor for the Cook Political Report, covering local and national politics. She's also the first woman, senior author of the venerable Almanac of American Politics, a post she held in both the 2022 and 2024 editions. All right, so we focused so far on the Republicans taking control of the Senate and what that means. And it also appears as though Republicans will keep a very slim majority in the House of Representatives. Daniel, how did that happen?
So what happened is that there was a lot of seats up. All the seats were up for in the House up every 2 years, and Republican candidates were able to use those key national issues of immigration and the economy, just like Donald Trump did, to gain back the White House. And he provided some coattails for some of these candidates. And so what's funny is that these congressional races used to be about local issues. Hey, this bridge needs repaired. This housing project. This is an important priority for the 3rd congressional district of Ohio. But now, because of social media and cable news, a lot of people vote based on national trends. And even if they like their Democratic congressman and what he's done for their district, they wanted to send a message to Washington and give Trump a majority. And so it's a pretty slim majority. And what is interesting is that Trump has taken away from it temporarily several members of Congress, because he is members of the House, because he's putting them in top jobs. And so U.S. Ambassador to the UN, his national security advisor, are all congressmen or were congressmen until the last few days. And so that is giving Republicans some heartburn in the House, because they don't want to lose their majority even temporarily.
So, Jessica, when we discussed the Senate, you referred to a handful of relatively surprise Democratic victories, split tickets between voting for Donald Trump and then voting for Democrats from the Senate. Did we have that same phenomenon at the House, or was this more or less as expected?
No, there were a few places where we saw split tickets. We don't have the full district level data yet, especially because a lot of places like California and Arizona are still reporting and counting votes and things too. But I mean, there were people like Mike Lawler in New York that was reelected from a more Democratic heavy area. Some, David Valdeo in California, more Republican moderate. So we probably will see some split districts in that way, but I think it's probably going to be fewer than we saw last cycle. And I think Trump, even in places where he didn't win, like New York, he still ran better than was expected in New Jersey and places like Minnesota. And then there were some open seats that Democrats were leaving. So Alyssa Slotkin, that was elected to the Senate, her House district that she was leaving actually flipped from Democratic to Republican. There was also redistricting this year in North Carolina. And because of the way that Republicans were able to redraw those districts, that actually could result in having given Republicans the House, because there were a lot of Democratic members that were drawn out of their seats and replaced by safe Republican districts. So it's all very, very close. And like Daniel said, Mike, Speaker Mike Johnson getting very nervous there. These people that are being picked for top jobs in the cabinet and otherwise are from safer Republican seats, but there still has to be a special election to fill their seat, and that takes time.
And David, Jessica just mentioned Speaker Mike Johnson. Now, after the last election, we saw the Speaker come and Speaker go. It was an endangered species to be Speaker of the House of Representatives. What is the status of Speaker Mike Johnson, and what's his relationship?
I think Speaker Mike Johnson's tenure is pretty well assured. He led them to victory, or at least he didn't preside over their defeat, and victory tends to get rewarded. And he is the second most prominent House guest at Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago house after Elon Musk. Mike Johnson has been there for, as we're speaking now, I think he's been there for 7 straight days, it seems to me. He's more or less living at Mar-a-Lago. He's glued himself to the president, and when you glue yourself to this president, that's job security. Very simple.
Daniel, when you look at Congress, what do you think legislative priorities are likely to be, given the composition of the incoming Congress?
So the Trump tax cuts of his first term, early in his first term, they have to get renewed in the next year or so. And so he's going to extend that renewal and say it's going to help the economy a lot. What is interesting is a lot of those tax cuts have benefited the wealthy members of society, even though Trump's base is the working class now. And so a lot of wealthy people in America vote for Democrats now. But what Trump also has to get from Congress is more money to pay for mass deportations, and so of illegal immigrants. And so we're not going to see 15 million illegal immigrants disappear from the country next year, but he is going to have to hire more agents and build more facilities to house them as they get deported, prioritizing people who broke criminal laws, not just crossing the border, but if they were convicted of murder or assault, then they are at the top of the line to get deported. But that's all going to require billions of dollars that Congress will have to appropriate, starting with the House.
So, Jessica, let's take a moment to look at the Democrats. David just a moment ago said, victory gets rewarded, and therefore the Speaker of the House is likely to stay in his job. The implication of victory gets rewarded is that defeat has its implications too. Any impact on Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries?
I think Chuck Schumer is pretty secure in his job there. I think, and Hakeem Jeffries seems to be as well. But I do think that there's going to be a lot of soul searching within the Democratic Party, and they're going to be looking for a new chairman of the Democratic National Committee coming up. There's certainly debate about. I think that the party should look at whether or not that Hakeem Jeffries is from New York. Other members of the House leadership are from Massachusetts and California. Should sort of House leadership be more representative of these places where Democrats need to win instead of sort of more liberal centers? You look at, again, at the Democratic leaders in the Senate. Chuck Schumer from New York is number 2, Dick Durbin from Illinois. I think you'll see a push to have sort of members from sort of middle America and different things. And I think that's something Democrats should undertake. Whether they will, we'll see. There's, for instance, the chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party sort of in the mix for DNC chair mentioned, who's built a really kind of sophisticated operation there, whereas Trump won narrowly, but they managed to hold on to that Senate seat and other House seats as well. So,
and David, we do have 2 months left, slightly less than 2 months for this Congress, which will change hands just after the new year. What do you think, especially the Senate, still controlled by Democrats, want to get accomplished while they still retain
judges, and judges, I would say, are the top 3 priorities. As was already said by my colleagues, judicial confirmation is to a lifetime appointment. So when a president fills a judgeship, the president's legacy generally lasts well beyond their own term in office. Many of these judgeships are for the lowest level on the federal courts, the so-called district court level, trial court level. These are the judges that don't make policy so much. They're supposed to interpret.
All right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. I want to thank you, Jessica Taylor, Daniel Littman, and David Hawkins, for helping to explain the congressional vote in our 2024 elections. Thank you for joining me on Dakhel, Washington. وصلنا إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أسئلة أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، خاصة فيما يتعلق بالأولويات التشريعية لإدارة ترامب، أرجو التواصل معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاغ InsideWashington أو مباشرة @RobSatloff. نلتقي في الأسبوع المقبل، وحتى ذلك الحين شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.